A few months ago, I made my yearly video where I talk about all the cinema cameras that have become affordable on the used market, and one of them specifically has been haunting me. I've actually lost sleep over this. Cameras don't usually keep me up at night, but this one feels different. The year is 2010, and we're starting to shoot movies on digital. It's way more convenient, it's easier, it's faster. The only problem is it still looks very digital. Colors can look a bit weird, latitude's lacking, highlight roll-off is a bit harsh, there's all kinds of issues. Arri has already experimented with the D20 and D21 digital cameras, but they had something else up their sleeve. Instead of fading into history as the company that used to make the best film cameras in the world, Arri became the company that also makes the best digital cameras in the world, all because of one camera. Here in 2025, other companies are just now, 15 years later, starting to make sensors that compete with it. Arri was so proud of the sensor, they didn't update it for almost 15 years straight, and just about every movie you can think of that went digital was shot on either this camera or a variation of this camera. Just using its name will both activate your smart home and any filmmaker standing nearby. And although the sensor has stayed the same over the years, the body design has been refined into a smaller and more advanced chassis. And Arri has even stitched the sensor together to make both the LF and 65 variations, which are currently dominating the high-end market. Over the years, the praise of the LF3 sensor has only gotten higher, but the first iteration of it, the one that changed everything, has slipped through the cracks. With newer, more advanced, and smaller cameras constantly diluting the market, older cameras lose value and become accessible to more filmmakers, even the ones that disrupted entire industries. And there it was, the greatest cinema camera of all time for 3% of its original price. You would think a camera of this caliber would carry its value a little bit longer, but there's a couple reasons why the Alexa Classic specifically has become more affordable in the past couple of years. If you're a Hollywood DP, you have the budget to rent, so you might as well go with an Alexa Mini or a Mini LF since they're easier and more efficient to use. If you're an owner-operator, you might want the ability to shoot 4K for streaming platforms, which this camera doesn't do. If you're a prosumer, enthusiast, or content creator, using a camera this big is either not efficient or impossible because you need expensive support gear that can support its weight. So even though it has one of the best images in all of filmmaking, it's impractical for almost everybody. With just the EVF, this thing clocks in at 14 pounds. Add a V-mount, a lens, and other peripherals, and you can easily knock on the door of 20 to 30 pounds. That means expensive tripod heads and support gear. And speaking of V-mounts, this camera body has a 95 watt average power draw, so it will absolutely slam through batteries. There's also one audio input, it's a 5-pin XLR, and has no phantom power. That means we're looking at a gigantic camera with no internal NDs, essentially no audio, a huge power draw, a lens mount that doesn't work with most of my lenses, and uses old, proprietary, weird media. So let's address all of those one by one. Audio will be a challenge if you usually record on body like I do. The Alexa isn't designed to be a one-stop shop for audio and video. This is a pure-blood cinema camera, and Arri was fully expecting you to separately record audio when they designed this. On bigger shoots, I would certainly have a dedicated audio recorder, but for now, I found a pretty cool solution. This Alexa came with a really cool Beach Tech mixer that once you attach it to the rig, you can run an XLR and LEMO, and then you get 2 phantom-powered 3-pins. Yeah, it adds some extra weight and bulk, but in any scenario when I'm recording audio directly into the camera, it's probably going to be on sticks anyway. This will be great for talking heads and corporate type shoots. Next is power draw. Like I said earlier, this thing pulls almost 100 watts, so it'll scrub through batteries fast. It might be a good idea to stock up on some V-mounts and maybe even a shark fin, so we'll be able to hot swap. There's also an AC adapter, so we can run this thing off of mains whenever possible, which isn't a big deal in a lot of scenarios. Next is the lack of internal NDs. For a cinema camera like this, there usually isn't internal NDs anyway, and most DPs are going to be using a matte box with their own filters. I love my wooden camera UMB1, but I don't have any nice filters for it yet, so if I need NDs, I'm going to use my Freewell M2s. The native lens mount is Arri PL, which is hardly a problem. PL is awesome, but I don't have any PL lenses right now, and probably won't anytime soon. I did find a really solid solution though, and it's a product made by C7 Adapters. They make a really solid conversion kit that swaps the standard PL for a positive lock EF. All I did was loosen some screws, uninstall the PL mount, install the C7 adapter, and I'm off to the races. The Alexa Classic takes Sony SxS cards through this really satisfying door lock. Listen to this thing. I really like these cards themselves because they're super robust and solid, but they pose a couple of issues. For one, they are discontinued, kind of. The Alexa Classic likes Sony SxS Pro and Pro Plus cards, which they don't make anymore, but they do make new versions that cost a lot of money. Instead, your best bet is probably to find some used ones or make sure your Alexa Classic comes with a whole bunch of them. Another thing is you need this gigantic card reader to make them work, which is a bit annoying, but not the end of the world. Last but not least is the size and weight of the Alexa Classic. With a camera this big, we're nearing the point where you cannot operate one of these as a handheld without a little bit of extra gear like an easy rig or a shoulder rig. Luckily, right out of the box, this thing is already ready to go on a shoulder. My package came with 2 different shoulder pads, and this one's basically a couch. It's awesome. The EVF is already ideal for this, so once you attach a follow focus and maybe some arm extensions to the rosettes on either side, you're good to go. Buying the right support gear can be tough too, mainly tripod heads. Last year I bought a Sackler Flowtech 75 and an Activate head on a B&H flash sale, and even though it was like 50% off, it was still really, really expensive. I think that support gear is always a better investment than cameras, so it was totally worth it, even though it took up my gear budget for the entire year. And technically, the Activate is rated to hold the Alexa Classic, and then some. A lot of professionals will tell you to get a 100mm bowl or more for a camera like this, and to not trust a 75mm head like the Activate, and honestly, they're probably right. I haven't had any issues, and the Activate has held it like a champ so far, but please be cautious if you plan on doing the same thing. Don't say I didn't warn you. If you're willing and able to work through all these challenges, then congratulations, here are your rewards. The physical design of the Arri Alexa is absolutely beautiful. Everything is made of metal. The curves and edges are masterfully crafted. Tolerances are tight, buttons are satisfying, and in general, when you operate an Alexa, it feels like you're using something important, something that should be respected. The I/O selection is also delicious. There's all kinds of things here I'm not cool enough to use, but chances are you can find what you need. Here's a wee list. Operating the camera is also really satisfying. There's a couple function buttons within reach that I have bound to different view commands like LUT toggle and peaking, and then there's this gigantic, super satisfying soft touch record button that I hope every single one of you get to press someday. For exposure and focus, I'm usually pressing one of the 2 buttons on the viewfinder that are marked as focus, which gives you a magnifier, and exposure, which toggles false color. Also on the viewfinder are 2 menu buttons and a jog wheel, which let you change all kinds of things on the fly, even exposure settings, so you don't have to go over to the assistant side of the camera, which by the way, is really cool. Sometimes I like to do walkthroughs of these menus, but I won't in this case for 2 reasons. First, it's so simple it's barely worth going through, and second, Arri has an online simulator where you can play with this menu. I'll link it below if you're interested. You basically fly around using a jog wheel and a bunch of menu buttons. It's awesome. Alright, this is where it gets really fun. You buy a camera like this for the famously lovely Arri image quality. So to see if it's worth the hype, let's start with dynamic range. The LF3 sensor has been the benchmark for digital cinema since its introduction, and you can see that in the dynamic range scores. We're getting 14.8 stops at a signal-to-noise ratio of 1 and 13.8 stops at a signal-to-noise ratio of 2, which is insane. Most of the time, I reference signal noise 1 as my measurement for total DR, and that would mean the Alexa Classic is capable of giving us a full 15 stops of dynamic range. I've never used anything even close to that. Let's put it to the test with the push-pull latitude test. Alright, we're going to compare the Alexa to the other 2 cameras that I have in the studio, which is the Sony FX30 and the Blackmagic Broadcast G2, which has the same sensor as the Pocket Cinema Camera 6K. So here we are with the Alexa. This is in ProRes 422 and HD. And this shot right here is correctly exposed, so we're not pushing or pulling at all. We're gonna start with overexposure. So there's 1 stop overexposed, looks great, obviously. 2 and 3 look good. Usually 4 stops is where we start to see the cracks form in most sensors, but here there is nothing that's breaking. Looks great all around, my skin looks awesome. Nothing is clipping just yet. That's pretty impressive already, but 5 has a little bit of color shifting, a little bit of weirdness. Gerard is losing detail, but my skin still has all of its detail in here, which is insane. I've never seen a camera perform well up to 5 stops. Let's see what 6 does. So we do lose it at 6. I am clipping right here on the side of my face. There's a little bit of color shifting. It's like weirdly magenta. It's between 4 and 5 stops. Let's see how it's kind of shifting a little bit. Interesting. Impressive nonetheless. 5 stops overexposed is ridiculous. Okay, back to 0. 1 stop under, looks fine. 2 looks fine. Starting to see a little bit of noise. I'm gonna zoom in a little bit, press play. Definitely noise present, but the noise pattern is gotta be one of the best ones I've ever seen. So filmic and nice looking. 3 stops under. Starting to get some noise. There's a lot of texture in here, but I'm gonna call it usable. 4 stops under. Now that we're getting into the bottom end, I've gone in here and I've done, I'll just show you step by step. This is what the shot looks like right out of camera, or at least after normalizing. That's what it looks like right out of camera. That's what it looks like after normalized. There is a lot of noise in here. So what I've done is some noise reduction. Because the noise pattern is so even and granular, it actually does a really good job with noise reduction. And this is like apply a noise reduction in 10 seconds kind of thing. I did not dial in everything. I just threw on some spatial and temporal, and this is what we're getting. Already looks pretty good. The contrast is looking kind of weird, so I did a little bit of helping with the contrast, and then a little bit of shifting that green look away. It looks like it's shifting magenta if you overexpose too much, and it goes green if you underexpose. We're getting down to the wire a little bit, but I would call this usable. 5 is not. There's just no way that we could possibly do that. So 5 over and 4 under is 9 stops of latitude. That's the best I've ever tested in the studio. For reference, we're gonna pop over to the broadcast G2. Over 1 looks good, 2, 3. It's cracking at 4. And to make these match, I recorded both in ProRes 422 and HD. So with the broadcast, you would get highlight recovery. With this specific shot, I don't think it would completely save it. I think that the skin tone would, a lot of the detail would come back, but it would shift, the colors would shift too much and it would look weird. So we'll call it 3 stops of overexposure latitude in this lighting scenario. Let's go down to 0. 1 stop under, 2, 3 looks good, 4 looks good actually. Some noise, doesn't look as good as the Alexa's noise. It still looks pretty good though. Let's go to 5, and yeah, it's usable, but again, I'm in here doing some work. 6. Yeah, my hair is black. There's just no information for it to reference. Oh man, look at this. Look at this color shifting. My eyes look like they're purple. You could absolutely force this if you needed to, but I'm not gonna count it. We'll call it at 5. Let's do the FX30 really quick. 3 looks good. 4's cracking. So we are gathering 3 stops of overexposure latitude here. My skin is clipping. The roll off doesn't look too bad though. Under, 1, 2, 3 looks good, but we're starting to lose some contrast already. So here's 4. We're doing a lot to help it, including noise reduction and contrast. Look at how much contrast we lost here. I'm gonna call this usable, but there's no way we can get this working. So we got 7 stops of exposure latitude for the FX30, 8 for the broadcast G2, and 9 for the Alexa. Really impressive performance, and no one's surprised. Here's the thing about color. The further I get into my career, the more I'm realizing that you can pay the balance of bad color science with color grading and decent lighting. And most cameras you can pick up these days will give you a lovely image. So what's the point? Is it even worth going up to an arri? Is it even that much better? It's kind of a complicated question, but the short answer is yes. It is absolutely the best looking digital image I've ever seen, but it also isn't magic. I have a theory. I think most of the images we see coming out of Alexas are so impossibly good because it's an expensive camera. And I don't mean it's an expensive magic potion, I mean it's an expensive camera. And because it's expensive, it's almost exclusively used by professionals who know how to set up a composition and light it correctly. If you use a casual camera in a casual way, you can get mediocre results. And if you use an Alexa in a casual way, you can still get mediocre results. So it's not magic, but it definitely still is the best. All right, so colors are really subjective, so nothing I'm about to say matters even a little bit, but we're gonna just jump in. Normally, I'm gonna come in here, I'm gonna grab the sauce, and I'm gonna make the sauce work for me by changing the input to wide gamut 3 and C-Log 3. And colors are looking awesome already, of course, but I'm gonna start from scratch and do a color space transform for this one. We'll get wide gamut 3, log C3. I am working in Rec 709 and Rec 709A. This is straight out of camera, and I know this is stupid because we're not comparing it to anything, but I mean, the colors look good, the skin tones look good. It's like a lot of nuance in the skin, the lips look correct. Kind of feels like lips are usually the first thing to start looking weird when colors are strange. My hair actually looks brown, which is great. A lot of times it either turns green or black for some reason. I'm gonna go to the next shot. There she is. Okay, this is in our front room. First of all, somehow we almost have no detail clipping out of this window. My wife's sitting with her back to a window I've exposed for her face, and we almost have all the detail out of the window. and the sun is out. It's just absolutely ridiculous. And the roll off is so lovely. Look at the waveform down here. I could pull some of this down so we can look at it. I mean, it's so smooth, it's crazy. Right, so here we get a good look at this green sweater she's got on. It's capturing the vividness of this green sweater perfectly. Her skin looks exactly the way her skin looks. Again, lips look good. It just looks like really natural and smooth. Here's a third shot. Put the color space transform on there. I overexposed this one quite a bit. So I'm gonna go into curves, make sure editable splines is on. And I want to make sure that the highlights look good. They're not quite the highlights, but the sky. I want it to land right about there. Well, that's kind of closer to what the scene looked like in real life. And it looks awesome. There's a great color separation in here. Here's the last shot. We got Remy just falling asleep right here. This one's in here because it's underexposed a bit. Sometimes sensors look a little weird. The colors start to look a little bit weird if they're underexposed. And this is just straight up not the case here. They probably would after a while. It does look like the Alexa shifts green if you severely underexposed, but I'm underexposed a stop or two here. We have a little bit of visible noise. But the noise pattern looks so good. Just really, really impressive. Now let's talk about sensitivity. I love listening to older DPs talk about the Alexa because they talk about how clean it is and how it can basically see in the dark, which makes sense because they're used to film, which is a lot less sensitive. But on the other side, there's a lot of younger DPs that will talk about how the Alexa is kind of noisy and you have to be really careful when lighting it. And it's so interesting to listen to both sides. So let's see what we can get away with. Not only have I recorded this at night, but I've recorded this at night at 3200. So we are like 5 stops underexposed here. There is absolutely no reason why almost any camera would be able to make this work. But we're gonna try anyway. So color space transform, there we go. So that's straight out of camera. Lots of texture, not enough level. We're gonna add a node before the color space transform, and we're gonna try to do some fancy flying with the contrasts. So we need to find the floor and put it right about there. I want to make the shadows look smoother and more detailed than they are by kind of crunching everything into one more compressed line on the waveform. So watch the waveform down here. All I'm doing is compressing and lifting a little bit. Bring the highlights up a bit. It's easy to overdo it and bring the shadows up a little bit too much. Okay, that's better. Still a lot of noise. So we'll add another node to the very beginning of the node tree. I'm going to go into noise reduction. Just really fast. We'll grab 2 frames. Work this up until about 40. It's doing a pretty good job of cleaning up. I'm going to unbind the Luma from Chroma in spatial threshold and turn up Chroma a little bit. Should this go into a final project, you would really want to come in here and change to better, change to enhanced, maybe even try ultra noise reduction. Kind of just want to see what I can get away with really fast. And this doesn't look too bad. Definitely doesn't look great. You're not, if you're used to like an FX3 or something, you're not going to get anywhere near what you can do with a camera like that. This is not designed to be a see in the dark kind of camera. I'm going to copy this grade and go to this next shot. And here's one issue we have here. This was recorded with a 2x anamorphic. And I don't have any kind of anamorphic support on the Alexa. So the first thing we need to do is come in here and change the height to 50%. Look at that aspect ratio. Cinematic. Here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna add another node before. I'm gonna go to HDR. Gonna make sure that it is operating within log C. Yep. And then you can go to global and just pull this exposure up. I kind of like this gamma curve here. So I'm just gonna feed it some more level from beneath. Again, this is at 3200. It was first thing this morning. The sun was not even out and it was cloudy, so there's barely any light. It honestly looked more like this. Lots of noise here. Such a great noise pattern though. And then we have noise reduction as well. I don't know, man. Might be able to make that work depending on the project. So I don't know, it's somewhere in between. It is a wonderfully clean sensor if exposed correctly, but you can't get away with underexposing like 5 stops at night in the sewer and then expect to get clean footage out of it. The Alexa Classic feels like an important camera. At night, I feel like a kid waiting for the Christmas presents downstairs, knowing that there's one sitting in the basement. It's a weird feeling. Ultimately, I can't keep both of my cameras, and Eleanor is more than enough for the kind of stuff I do, but I'm glad I got to use the Alexa for this short period of time. It's given me quite a bit of perspective when it comes to digital imaging, and even more respect for this craft. It's kind of mind-blowing how ahead of its time this camera was, and even more insane that these days it's possible to own the camera that changed an entire industry. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.